Hi, today's lesson is going to focus on Cormac McCarthy and his background and his novel, The Road. So, before I get into a detailed explanation about the text itself and go for close readings of the text, I thought that it would be important for you to have a background about the author um, and also know what kind of works influenced his literary career as a whole, and especially the work that we are studying, the novel The Road. And I want you to think about one question before we start reading this, indulging into this today's lesson. The thing is, the question that I want to ask you is that whether we need to know about a writer's social life, biohistory, like when they were born, where they were born, what their parents did, whom did they marry, how was the life, happy, sad, how was school experience, what kind of training they received. Are these pieces of information really important for understanding a text that is written by this author? So there is no yes or no answer to this, right? So you have to, if you like, there is and isn't. Yes, you can say yes, it is important because it can help me understand the text better. Then my second question is, why do you think so, and how do you think these kind of information can help us understand the text better? So um, think of any writer that you are familiar with and try to think what kind of information you already knew about them before you read their book. So think about any kind of bestseller novels that you have read recently, or think about your teenage years when you were really particularly fan of a particular book. It can be any genre. It can be a comic book, it can be a novel, it can be even a chapbook picked up from a grocery store. But my question is, did you think about this? Did you or did you not know anything about the background of the person who wrote it? And the second question from there is that how do you think this information or lack of information influenced your understanding of the text itself? So, this is the background. Now I'm going to tell you, today we're looking at Cormac McCarthy. So he is one of the main writers we are studying in this course, and we're studying particularly his novel, The Road. And we're contrasting McCarthy and McCarthy's dystopian apocalyptic world with Margaret Atwood's apocalyptic world. So it's like a story, right? Like, understand the 21st century literary world. All these people are writing works, and we are consuming those creative productions. And they add something to our society, to our cultural life, to our belief, and we all evolve as a society. So all these creative pieces have a very important role to play in our life. Um, so keeping that big picture in mind, now think about it. What role does this background information about the author have in our ability to critically analyze a piece of text written by that particular author? Okay, so I'm going to come back to this point again and ask you the same question. Excuse me. So, first I should probably begin by who Cormac McCarthy is, and why did we even choose to read his work? Well, Cormac McCarthy is an American playwright and novelist who is most famous for his work on Southern Gothic, Western, and post-apocalyptic genres. One of the reasons I chose him was because he is probably one of the most famous American novelists of our time, and we're on the other hand we covered already Margaret Atwood. So North American writers, both of them are influential 21st century North American writers. So I thought it would be an interesting parallel to have these two authors from two neighboring countries to show how their works imagine this horrendous end of human life and civilization as we know it on Earth. Um, so McCarthy was born and raised in the Roman Catholic tradition. He was born in 1933, so he was born a long time before you and me. Keep this also in mind that this is like the high time of Great Depression in the United States. So all these things are part of the world where he was born into. He later he would move to Tennessee with his family, and then eventually attend the University of Tennessee with a break in between entering the university and getting out with a degree in liberal arts. In the middle of that whole thing, he was serving in the US Air Force for 4 years. So all these things are, again, think about this in a critical way, that the guy who is going to write one of the most important texts for this course, or one of the most important texts of post-apocalyptic literature, this is his background. He is born and brought up in a very religious family, and his schooling is also through a religious school system. So he attended Roman Catholic high school. And then he goes to the military, serves there, then gets a degree in liberal arts, comes out with the degree in 59. And then he goes on to marry his classmate in 1961, and the marriage fails. Within a year, they divorce, and the reason for the divorce was that his wife claimed that he was very unsympathetic as a person, as a partner. So right after the marriage, she was pregnant, or she was probably just pregnant before the marriage. But anyhow, so somewhere there, and the story is that when she was pregnant, Cormac McCarthy tells her to get a job so he can focus on his literary career. This is also another anecdote now, a separated couple. This is the story of the wife, all of that. But then, as we see, the novel that we are studying is a narrative of a father and a son and their journey through this post-apocalyptic wasteland and their struggle for survival. The funny thing is that Cormac McCarthy had no role in bringing up his first son, who was born in 1962. So that is the firstborn son. Then, okay, the marriage falls apart. Then he has his first novel published in 1965. It's called The Orchard Keeper. From then on, his career progresses well. So he gets the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in 1966, and then Rockefeller Foundation grant also in the same year. He travels to Europe, meets his second wife, has a few good years, then at this time, and then comes back to settle down back in close to Tennessee, close to Louisville. So right after he comes back, his second novel is published. It's called Outer Dark in 1968. Then 5 years later, in 1973, his third novel is published. It's called The Child of God. The first two novels were very well accepted, in a unanimous appreciation for his work, but the third novel had mixed reviews. Now I will just probably post the entire all the works that are he has written, authored by him, and you can just consult the timeline to see when what is coming out. But then I want to move forward And just give you this hint that then finally he moves on to write some border trilogies. The border is Mexico-US border. In that defines his works in the 90s. Then in the 21st century, he has two iconic works coming out. I'm pretty sure everyone knows of the first one, No Country for Old Men. He published it in 2005, and it was later adapted into an award-winning film by the Coen brothers. And 1 year later, um, he publishes The Road, the text that we're going to read now. But since then, he has not published any other literary works. This year, earlier in April, he wrote a scientific nonfiction called The Kikule Problem. Where did language come from? So this is also, I think, significant to remember that as we read The Road, you will see how McCarthy has a very unique style. And once you get used to his style, it's like a signature mark. No matter if the if I rip off the cover page and the title page and you don't have a way to know that it is written by Cormac McCarthy in print, like there is no indication, you don't have the pages to tell you who wrote it, you will know by his signature writing style that it's being written by him. So I find it very interesting that he this year he actually wrote something about the origin of language and how people communicate, how animals communicate, why did language even exist. So also bear that in mind when you're reading the novel, that someone who is so interested in the purpose of language and the development of language in human society or non-human society in living beings, his way of expression in the novel, that would make an interesting connection when we get into the novel. So far, now you tell me. So you understood that this is a human being who was born a long time back in 1933. He's still alive, publishing works, has written a whole variety of works. Um, Starts his literary career in 1962, with his first novel coming out in 1962, and he's pushing well until now, and actively writing. Um, so with this information in mind, when you approach the text, The Road, how do you think your acceptance or engagement with the text will be influenced by this background information? I want you to think about that. Take a moment and think about that before I go on to talk about the other important literary figures who has influenced his writing style, and then give you a little brief introduction about The Road. Before I conclude, though, I have to just say this, that he, in an interview, actually has accepted that the inspiration for The Road comes from his son. So he he had a firstborn son who was born in 1962, and his second-born son is born 46 years after that. So there is a major age gap between his two kids. And with the second son in mind, he wrote this book. Again, this is information about the guy who is writing it. My question is, how do you think it influences your ability to think about a text when you know all this information? So the whole purpose of this lesson is to make us aware of what kind of reading are we engaging with when we take into account these kind of information which are non-textual, out extra textual information in our reading.